This episode of Gamerheads is brought to you by Magic Mind, the healthy energy drink that will help you take your creativity to a new level.
Hi, I'm Celia Schilling from Yacht Club Games.
Hey, this is James from Mega Cat Studios.
Hey, this is Matt, aka Stormageddon from Reignite, Screen Snark, and the Fun and Games podcast.
This is Stephanie from the Boss Rush podcast and the Boss Rush Network.
Hey, this is Mark and Keon from Bonte Avond.
Hey, this is Sebastian with the ProNerdReport.com and the Single Player Experience podcast.
Hi, this is Chris.
Mike.
And Garrett from Daylight Basement Studio.
Hey, this is Baron J67 from Level 1 Gaming.
Hey, this is Todd Mitchell from Code Right Play.
Salutations. This is Mike Carroll from Stroll Art.
Hey, this is Jeff Moonen from Fun and Games Podcast.
Hey, this is Patrick from the Backlog Odyssey.
Hey, this is Rune from Runic Codes.
Hi, this is Andrew from Spalato Bros.
Hi everyone, Jill Grote here from the Indie Informer.
Hey, this is Brimstone, and you're listening to Roger Reichart on the Gamerheads podcast.
And welcome to another episode of the Gamerheads podcast. My name is Roger. Along with me this week, I have a very special guest. I am really excited to talk to this guest about their career in music. I have Chase Bethea. He is a multi-winning composer, composes video game music, and also a published author. You've worked on 25 plus games or so. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And now recently you had a couple features in recording magazines, right? Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. Yeah. That right is here. Awesome. That is so amazing. Chase, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and meeting with me. I said this pre-show, but I am really super excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Roger. It's an honor to be on the Gamerheads podcast. It's really cool. And I'm just happy to chat with you and talk about anything, towards video game music related and industries and all that cool stuff.
Nice. Yeah. Well, before we go into the process of writing music, I want to know more about you. So tell us about yourself. What got you into gaming? I know that I've listened to podcasts we were on and you talked about that you're a gamer first. So how did you get into gaming and how did you get into, creating scores for video games?
Yeah. So it started around when I was 6 years old. My cousin came up from, it's a little bit of a between the two. So I'll vacillate between both stories. My cousin came up from Barbados. I was about 6 and he brought up a Game Boy, and the Game Boy, the game that he had was Donkey Kong. Ooh. And that was, I believe it's Donkey Kong 94. So
a great game, by the way.
Yeah, it is. It really is a solid game. And it's so solid that I practically begged my grandmother to have my own Game Boy and buy that game. And it's so solid or unsolid that I headbutt the Game Boy based on the airplane level of stage 7 and broke the screen because I was angry for my first Game Boy. But I got pretty far. But yes. But yeah, I got really mad and literally headbutt my Game Boy and that broke. Yes. I put it in the trash. I remember it clear as day.
Wow.
So that's how I got into gaming.
You're really into gaming. You were really into gaming.
I got into it, and yeah. So there's that. But my grandmother also, you're gonna hear a lot of stories because my grandmother really is, I think, the foundation of my. She encouraged the childhood that I thrived for, that I was looking for mostly at the age of nourishment and that kind. So she gave me, she bought me my first N64, which thankfully I still have to this day. I didn't break that. Nothing
no headbutting there. No.
No headbutting there. And I played, those are hard games on there, right? I did run up her phone bill for Los Angeles, for Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the Water Temple. That phone bill, when Nintendo Hotline used to be a thing.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, yeah. I called the hotline and had no idea. But then my grandma was on the phone so much. I figured it's not going to make a big deal. You don't get charged for this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm only in second, third grade.
Oh my gosh.
And so, yeah, the phone bill did get run up, but that's another story. I got to get through that water temple. I never called for anything else. Maybe the spirit temple, but I think it was like mostly, it was fine.
Yeah.
And then I learned strategize exists, and so I didn't do that. And the boss strategy got from Majora's Mask, and I borrowed that game. That didn't get purchased. So I also was really good with tech as a child, and so my grandmother was always like asking me to hook up her cassette systems and receivers, and I was able to figure that out within first grade. In that area of things. Yeah, just fixing it and doing it. Not having an experience. This is an era way, obviously, eons before YouTube.
Yeah.
You need to go to the library to find out something or call somebody or see somebody do it. Yeah. So for me to intuitively figure this things out, swapping stuff, figuring things in, there was a system underneath the spare bedroom in my grandmother's apartment. And this box had pictures. And the pictures was in a rectangle form, and I saw one thing that particularly stood out to me. Was football. There's football, and there was like American football, and there was football. And so I looked at this a bunch of times, and I put it back underneath the bed, and I took it out, and I opened it up, and it looked like, to me, what I thought would be like an old fax machine. I thought. So I didn't think anything of it. But as I thought about it, as I kept digging underneath the bed over a period of time, like some days, months, I thought, well, this looks like it could be something else. I don't think fax machines had pictures like this. And so when I finally asked my grandmother, she said, "Oh yeah, it's a fax machine," because it had a controller with number pads and everything else. Yeah. And so I thought, no, I don't think so. Yeah. So with me knowing how to figure things out and plug things in, it was an Intellivision.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right. And so, yeah, not close to a fax machine. But I
could see it though, because they kind of look like fax machines. They really did.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is 90, whatever, mid 90s. Of course, my grandmother would say, and I don't know, I'm new to the world, right?
Right.
You can't see like this was a fax machine from 1974. Like this is not, no. that wasn't it. Right. I knew technology existed. Right. I just didn't know what things were. Yeah. But because I was able to think, okay, pictures and fax machine. I know what fax machines are. These in this era, this ain't it. I've never seen anything like that. What is this? So my curiosity led me to plugging that in, and my first game that I played and getting into gaming was Dragonfire. Oh. So technically, my intro to gaming was between the Game Boy and Intellivision.
Wow, that's awesome. And when did you start getting into composing then? Like, how did you find like that was something that you enjoy doing?
So another two-part, what I usually say is most people get introduced to an instrument around 6 years old. And I was introduced to gaming, and I was introduced to the Game Boy. And so the Game Boy camera came out in 97. And during this one part on the Game Boy camera, you use like this little DJ, and you take your little face, and you got these little fun little faces you could do, and you have these little hands. Yeah. And then if you press select, it opens up a screen. And probably a lot of people didn't even think about messing with the parameters. Yeah. But I did. And what I realized was that was a early tracker of how game music was made in the era of like the 80s and the 90s. And it was using, because it was on the Game Boy, it was using the 2A03 chip, which is the sound chip for the Game Boy of the dot matrix. And so natively, not only is it the first selfie, it's the earliest period of writing music for games. Wow. And I was writing my own tunes on there and then have my little face DJ and scratch the stuff. And I was making my own tunes.
That's so cool.
So I didn't realize that's what I was doing. I was just having fun. Yeah. And I was just doing it. But I like I said, being introduced, having a nice library on the Game Boy, I was introduced to a lot of Game Boy music. So Final Fantasy Legend 2 to Batman Forever. And so Tim Follin and another composer was introduced to me at that age, and Sega Genesis things to different Japanese composers there. And like hearing Yoko Shimomura's like Street Fighter 2 type of score on there at that time, and listening to Nobuo Uematsu and Kenji Ito from Final Fantasy Legend 2, those type of things. And so with that sound palette that's happening, I was hearing these things. But my father bought me an alto saxophone, and I was in 5th grade, and I was also in choir. And he would say, you need to be practicing that saxophone for at least an hour. He was right, and I did, but I got bored. And so I started transcribing. I didn't know what transcribing was, but I was hearing music from smooth jazz radio stations and hearing it by ear. And I didn't know what sheet music was. My father didn't know. He just bought the saxophone and here's the book, here's the saxophone, play it, learn it, read it, play it. But I was bored. And so I started listening to some of the music when I would hear it and just write the letters. I knew what the letters were, but I knew how to read, but I didn't know what sheet music was. So I couldn't do it the way that it was properly done. But I just wrote the letters, and the letters end up being the tune. And then I'd be just able to play, and like, you learn that song? I was like, yeah, I just learned it by hearing.
Oh my gosh.
So my ear was very strong by that time in like 5th or 6th grade, and I just continued. So that's my earliest way of composing music.
Wow.
Until I moved with my mom in early 2001, and I got the computer, and that's when I started writing music on the computer properly in terms of that. And my first piece of computer music that I wrote was on Hammerhead, and then it moved to FL Studio 3. And the first thing I presented to somebody, it was at school, was at a bus stop, and the first thing they said to me was, "It sounds like it should be in a video game."
Wow.
That was the first thing they said.
Wow.
And so that's kind of the trajectory of how everything is lining up to where I am today.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like you're a very curious person. And it sounds like curiosity has driven a lot of your creativity as well.
You're correct. You're nailing down exactly what I usually say to people. And actually, I think there's something that an online mentor I watched that says the key component to art is curiosity. And what I say, and before I heard him say that recently, like a week ago, I've always been saying, like, hey, you need to tap into your childhood to be able to create these things that we're working on and stuff, because the curiosity is usually what causes the experimentation, which is what leads to other things. I mean, just like I said, from discovering the Intellivision was curiosity in its own right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So can you walk us through what your typical process is when you're like composing music for a game? Like, where do you begin with that? How do you start something like that?
I start with curiosity.
Yeah.
It's now I have to. This question is interesting because before, in my earlier in my career, like I say, I've been doing this for like 13 years now, and so for, let's say, the first 3 years, it was about knowing what I could do in terms of how others have done it, but also doing what I thought felt right and just going with that, but not really. But I didn't have a portfolio as vast as I did then as I do now.
Yeah.
And so now how I approach it is I have to remind myself to be experimental and to be curious, because before there was a process. I went to Moore Park College, is a community college. Then I transferred to Cal State Northridge. And so there's these systems of, this is how you do it. This is the theory. This is what's going on. But when I was in theory, it was always mostly like, why do I have to do that? And then so my first other composition told me, he's like, you got to learn the rules to break them. And I couldn't wait to break the rules. I couldn't wait. I say, okay, we'll learn them. Let's learn them well. And then let's experiment. And so through that is the process of, I get a game design document, or I get a vertical slice or early build of the game and some art, or whatever the case may be. And I start to remember my childhood in terms of putting the sound test on for the Game Boy, and then realizing, okay, in my experience of what games I've played, what does it sound like to me, and what's happening up here? What are the instruments? Because I'm coming from a chipset era. I'm coming from limitations. And so my curiosity comes with, okay, we could do that, or we could do this. What is the game telling me? And become more like whispering in terms of having this type of Dr. Dolittle conversation with the play, with the build itself. And with that, I build a sound palette, and that sound palette is going to be the sonic identity of what that game is going to be, because that's what I want it to be identified as for someone, whether in any accessibility type of format or non-accessibility of format. The option is, if you were out of the room and your other senses were still working, obviously for hearing, you would know it's this game.
That's amazing, because like I think about that like with color palette, right? Like people take certain colors and say like everything will be kind of revolving around this color, but then they all kind of tie into each other. And I think from like a design perspective, like from a visual design perspective, that makes a lot of sense. You have the repetitiveness and keep pulling in kind of the same elements, but it sounds like you do the same thing with music as well. You have like this palette of sound so that they all kind of tie into each other, but is different, but still is repetitive in regards to the fact, not repetitive, but maybe that you can remember, you can pick out things of like, oh, this is all tied together somehow. Is that kind of how you think when you're building that?
A little bit, yeah. And now that I specialize more in like interactive, dynamic, and adaptive music, which is what's in the Recording Magazine article that I talked about. Like I talk about the process of what this is like in terms of writing it in a vertical form and in a horizontal form. But because I understand games so well from playing it very early in my life all the way, continuously through, I understand mechanics in a game design format. So it's beyond music. It's understanding the entire art form of where it's like, okay, yes, this is the story. The story will come. But how is the player traversing to get through the story? And how are we keeping the engagement? Because again, like I come from learning from masterful designers, really. Like when those games are shipped and they used to go gold and, it's a different era of gaming now. So I'm talking about this specific earlier time of, let's say from the 70s up into the 2016, there was this masterful understanding of like these studios have it. They have these teams and intelligent folks that put this entire collaborative art form of level design to sound to storytelling to programming and beyond to make this experience to touch you in a lot of different emotional ways. You learn through these things through that, playing those games. And therefore I try to think, well, I wasn't at those studios and I'm not at those studios and I'm not with those folks, but I can take a little bit of these little things and apply them to what I want to do because there's similarities. Everything is it's not necessarily recycled, but it's inspired.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So one thing that I think is interesting and I think you might have mentioned this in one of the episodes I was listening to with you, but do you have a sound for your own style, like your own, like I guess footprint on the music? And secondly, like if you do have a sound, how do you force yourself to like kind of break that, your own rules, if you will, right? Your own rules that you establish for yourself.
I have a sound based off of what other people tell me.
Okay.
I don't know I have techniques that I think determine what that sound is, but what I never understand, and I think that's why it comes down to why it sounds like it should be in a video game, what people are saying, is the techniques. Even though I've listened to a lot of different styles of music, from metal to ambient piano to orchestral to reggae, calypso, hip hop to R&B to blues, country, folk, every single style of music that exists, I know world style. It still comes down to like people understanding that, like, yeah, that's Chase. Yeah, I knew it was you. And what I don't understand is every time I change the instrumentation, it doesn't matter. I could write chiptune and then I could write orchestral hybrid and then I could write 70s funk and they'll know. They'll know. There's something I'm doing that they're able to attribute it to, except for small different projects. There's some things I know that I haven't released. I'm very curious to know if my name wasn't attached and I just put it on, would they know it was me?
Yeah.
Because I think if I give them the answer and I say, listen to this, they're like, oh yeah, that was you, because I presented it to you. But if you don't know who I am, but you know how I am, but then if you heard it on a random playlist, would you be able to pick me out?
Yeah.
And so I'm very curious in that type of experiment to see how that kind of goes. But I know the techniques that I do. I like hemiolas. I like what is it? I like triplets. And I try not to, and I like Neapolitan chords. So I try my best not to write Neapolitan chords. I try my best to not write as many triplets. So that, but then there's almost like it's called the Mitsuda lick. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what that is.
I'm not.
You've played Chrono Trigger?
I have.
There's something like that.
Yeah.
There's like a little Mitsuda lick. I think that's in there. And it's in other games that he has done.
Yeah.
And people have now people have now found that in the other games. They're like, oh, it's the Mitsuda lick.
Oh, yeah.
So he's created a melody, and now he puts in other games to know where, like, this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
This is him.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I know, like I said, you're never really good. I'm never using the same chord progressions because it just depends on like the style of music and things that are going on. I never use the same instruments. And I'm writing in the most unprecedented time signatures for games that typical composers would not do. So yeah, I guess I stand out because that.
Yeah.
Because it's not to intentionally do it. It's just that's what my ear likes.
Yeah. Well, and the fact, I mean, to me, I just think that's amazing that you can listen to something and then you can transcribe it. That is amazing. And just, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wish I had a tenth of your talent to be able to do that because I can't do that at all. So, but yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. It's the old phrase adage that says hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And trust me, I don't have perfect pitch, so I don't work very hard. If you want to talk to a composer, another video game composer out there, Roger, he's got perfect pitch. And see how, like, if you think transcribing, there's levels. There's levels.
Well, I mean, let's talk about some of the challenges that you face then with composing music. So, like, what are some of the challenges that you face when you're thinking about writing music for video games?
Starting over all the time. And it ties just to what we were talking about, like, in terms of the process and the curiosity, is that I've got to rebuild the palette every time. It's not, this is a part of the process. Some people use templates, and I should be doing those, and I have been a little bit. I use once the template is built for the game because of the Sonic branding, then that's because it can't be when I did a talk about this at GDC about what the game project I was on for Quest Light Pocket developed by Sprite Wrench, the people, when there was this big sound of like always the orchestral template, and that's easy because orchestral music has been around since the 1700s.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have, the woodwinds at the top, and then the brass, and then the percussion, and then the strings. And so there's a whole family of organization. This is how it's always been done. You look in any score, that's how it's laid out. But when you come to Quest Light Pocket and you have a fantasy adventure game, what is your palette?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it could be this typical orchestral thing, but I didn't take that approach. I have a hybrid type of thing. So it's going to be some weird type of, there might be a banjo in there mixed with some pahu drums mixed with a synth that you probably that's not common. It's not Omnisphere. No slight to Omnisphere, but it's something that I did, and it's a patch that I created that I layered with something else.
Yeah.
So the palette of that, the challenge is every game has that Sonic branding and identity, and on a level of dynamics, I've got to think now about the dynamics. I've got to think about the mechanics of how these tie to the dynamics, how the arrangement, the formation, the palette building. It's a lot of work. And so and on top of which, the musicality, I am trying to tell a story without using words, and it has to be subconscious, which focuses on 50% of the art form, which is an entire art form of the entire collaboration of other people. It's not just about me.
Yeah.
So the challenge comes from, what is this supposed to be like? What is this going to sound like? And how am I going to rebuild this again? And so always starting it is the biggest challenge I've been facing recently, because I have a catalog of a discography of 13 something soundtracks of work over 13 years. And I don't want to write. I have to write like better than I wrote previously before.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also gives the identity to that game as well, right? Like, so it's that way you are internalizing it and you're thinking through yourself. No, yes, it does sound like a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. Like, that sounds like a lot of work. It would be a lot easier for you. Like, no, this is my sound. You listen to these licks and this is what you're going to get. Right. But when you were when you were talking about like starting over and building the template or building the palette for that game, like, to me, it's just, to me as a gamer, I'm like, I appreciate that, because that means you are internalizing that game and you're thinking differently about that game versus just like, I'm just going to fall back on what I've done before and just give you, and not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying, like, for me to hear you say that is pretty impressive. So yeah, as a gamer, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I'm a player first.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm able to connect with the player. I'm thinking about the player from the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about being a composer. I'm thinking about what would I enjoy? What would I want to play that I feel like you may not be a majority of the players out there that may not care, may not even catch it, but the percentage of people that do will enjoy and will appreciate. I want to talk to those folks. I want those folks to have it. And then maybe they'll influence and type of pull those other players into, because that's usually how it would be, right? It's like, have you played this? Did you catch this? And that's the infectious type of feeling I want to inspire and put into the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you collaborate with game developers? You talked about this a little bit, but how do you collaborate with them and the designers to ensure that your music aligns with their vision? And what does that look like?
It's now come down. Earlier in my career, I just thought I used to see it from the lens of they're making this game, it looks awesome, they know what they're doing, or they've made it this far for something like that. But what I've discerned is that being tenured in this, it comes down to a mindset of value. And you talked about this just now, whereas then you appreciate the part of work, the amount of work it goes in so that you can have a good experience. And so my first connection is the value of what I've put in terms of like how much work it takes, the compensation, and the vision of what that looks like. Because I think a lot of people take music for granted because a lot of music it's presented in an undervalued form. You know, you can stream it, it costs whatever counts per month. It's not a lot. But if you had to work and save for, just to listen to music, I think a lot of people would have a different perspective. And, and it also come from the devaluation of like people not really understanding like the business of things in terms of value, where things are like, okay, well, you made this game, but it's $5. Well, why did you do that? Where games have never, they didn't come from games being $5.
Yeah.
You did this because of an ecosystem of something that you're trying to undercut so you can get these things. And you're doing like a business model of like stack it deep and sell it cheap, when art is hard and unique and should be mostly valued at a higher pillar. So the mindset comes down to understanding it's not usually just about the music. Anyone could pull the references together and I can do it. I know I can. I'm looking for where your mind is in terms of how much work do you put into this? How much time and money do you put into this before I even come along? What have you done? Are you trying to cut corners, or for proper reasons, right? Like, because people have to. There's budgets and costs, but like, where is your mindset in terms of the intelligence of business and in terms of human value? Because if you're thinking how I'm thinking about the player first to the end, and you're not thinking about this is my game and I want to do this because it's something I want to play, but you need feedback. You don't realize that you're creating art yourself to get feedback from others. Because if you're just creating art, something for yourself, then there's no reason to really hire me, because you could technically take your time and do it all on your own. And then you can just play it and you don't really care about what others think, but you do care. You came from something and saw something in your life that you want to be part of, that you want to contribute. And therefore, there's an exchange that has to go on with that. And so I found if I'm not connecting with the mindset first, there's no real reason to do any of the projects. And a lot of projects, they may look great, but there's some disconnect, and that's okay. That means that, we've saved each other time and energy.
Exactly. Well, when you were saying that, it reminds me a lot of like acting, and a lot of times people will say in that medium of like, that character or that line that I'm delivering is only as good as what I'm getting back from the person that's feeding me those lines. And it's what you were just saying there feels very much the same way around I'm only going to be able to produce the music, if your passion is in there too, if your passion is not in it and you're not giving me something to work with, I'm going to have a hard time crafting my art, right, to meet what you're going to deliver to me.
Yeah, exactly. And I relate my career to acting a lot because there's people that I've grown up with and seen in my time of, from the 90s up until now. And I'm thinking like, wow, they're still acting, or they're still getting looks, or they're still getting booked, and they didn't give up. That's the longevity I'm looking for, but with the value that comes with it, right? In terms of they're being compensated properly, they're being treated well. And, a lot of people just take a lot of stuff for granted and just don't do that. And so there's burnout, and reasons burnout is because they're not respecting the art, and people are having bad intentions and other types of agendas that just don't coincide. But the acting is definitely something to be revered for, because that is so much work. My mom is an actress, and so I've watched her go through the process, and I was acting as a young child as well.
Oh,
and I decided I'm not doing it. I decided at 16, wait, I got to pay $500 because I cut my hair like this. And then it's like, when I get booked, I'm like, oh no, we're not doing this. It was already a rigmarole to go through the process of an audition, and then maybe get the call back and have your heart on the strings for it. And I was like, I'll just do audio. And then audio just came into, I'll just do music, and it has its own things, but I don't got to pay anybody if I want to change a chord progression.
That's true. That is true. That is true. That is so true. Oh, that's funny. Because it's funny that you say that. My daughter, my oldest daughter, who's 13 or 12, she's about to be turned 13. She is doing community theater, and she just dyed her hair. And I said, oh, I don't know if you should have done that, without talking to the director. But, it's community theater, so it's not like a big deal, right? But sure. It's just little things like that. Yeah, you think through of like, maybe you should have held back before you do something like that, right?
Yeah, so you relate because the hair thing was like a big deal, especially for women in acting. There's so much more hard on them, and it's just I commend them, and that's the art form I'm talking about. Like they also have to pull together something with other collaborators, the directors, producers, cinematographers, the writers, and the studio heads, and all these other things that go onto it. And yeah, we've got to be convinced through a persona that we see beyond you. We see you as outside of this, and you do this interview, we see you. But if you've got to convince us that you're this other character, and that comes along with a lot of expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have a favorite genre that you like to write music for?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm known as the Swiss Army knife of video game composition. I worked hard for that title. It's not self-proclaimed. It did come from a different podcast when they recognized the styles of music that I've done. And that's why I uploaded to my YouTube channel my latest reel to showcase, yes, this was why I became a video game composer, partially. And one of the reasons why, I should say. But I recognize what a video game composer is, and one of composer that you can do all the styles. There are people who are niche, and they know their lanes for those things, and those are respected and revered. But for me, as Chase Bethea, the video game composer, I enjoy writing and conflating styles, and writing in many styles and conflating styles, because that's what games are. You have a pirate theme with a puzzle, and you put that together with something else. What does that sound like? When I wrote the music for Aground and they were on Mars, I'm thinking, well, what does Mars music sound like? I don't know, but we'll just figure it out.
That's cool.
And so it comes back from the experimentation and goes back to the curiosity.
Yeah.
So I can't have, because I write for so many different style of games and game types, and games being inspired and conflated with their own different genres of action adventure or puzzle and cozy, I've got to be nimble within the same respect to create what that sounds like for them.
Yeah. And do you think, I would assume that helps you grow as a composer as well, not just to stick to one genre.
It does. And it's what works for me. So I'm not trying to cajole other composers out there that they got to do what I got to do. I have my reasons. I have my inspirations. I have my pillars in my vision of what that is, and I'm happy with that, and that's what is cool. So yes, I do grow. Sometimes it's exponential growth, and sometimes there's a plateau. But a good friend of mine said the period of plateau is just as important as the period of growth.
That's interesting. I like that.
Big love to the Nintendo.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love
my
that.
friend Doc.
Can you share one of your most memorable experiences with collaboration with a development team? And if you don't want to share like the name of the team or the name of the game, that's fine. But can you talk maybe just about like what made that so memorable?
Yeah, I can. I keep journals of every game development project that I'm part of. So now I'm trying to visually see what the entry was for one of them. And so I'm just going to kind of just give me a second. Pause,
no
think. And I mean, it should be memorable, but it's like on the spot to kind of go through the.
You've done 25 plus games. I do not expect you to.
The resume.
Yeah, exactly. If you did one game, I'm like, whoa, Chase, come on. But you did 25 plus, so.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the studio is no longer in existence, and it's sad because it was my second-ish biggest break of a game, but as a contractor, my biggest break, and it happened in 2020, just before like the precipice of the announcement of the pandemic when things were going down. And I got to be remote, but the team was so welcoming to my ideas and supporting me. They didn't know me. I never even exchanged handshake DNAs with them. Like, so it was a really cool experience it's just so uncanny because there was several of them and all of them were in an accord. That's usually you have one person who is not, but it was like to have several people on this team and then I'm talking to everyone and there's a synergy. It was such a emboldening experience from start to finish. I only had to write 5 tracks, but I also had to do it in the style of Kinet mechanics in a 2D form. And it was for this very low, it was a cozy type of exploratory game. And I played harmonica. I was getting back into that instrument again. And it was also like writing interactive, dynamic, adaptive music for it too, along with the software that I taught myself in 10 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And to be actually pitch it and then actually having to ship it with that style and do it all together. But I had 5 tracks in 2 months. And with all those type of, I remember so I had to start over, build the palette, do it, then change it and then do it again, but tied to mechanics and make it work. And yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was so gratifying because I was just, it reminded me that I was really just doing what I love at a high level. And it was being received. I don't know how else to say this. I was hitting it out of the park every time. And it validated that I knew what I was doing. And even though I do something else in the mix that I didn't do before, like that new software, and taught it to myself, like everybody was very accommodating. They worked with me. I got the team involved. It was just nice. And it was so good that I wasn't concerned about the milestone anymore. I was ahead of the milestone. I was able to write when I had a meeting. The most memorable part of it is like having this meeting with them and presenting what I was supposed to present, but then saying, oh, by the way, I've already finished the other one and here it is.
Wow.
And yeah, them loving that too. And then like, oh my God, it sounds like Johei Seishi and this is great. And this is like them feeling more inspired to work on it. Like, and me not becoming in, right? I'm a newcomer to their team for that as a contractor, but never even having this inhuman experience. It's very It's very enlightening and heartwarming.
Mm.
And it was like one of those that I sought out after to work with like the studio and stuff. And I love the long-term folks that I'm with now, Fancy Fish, because there's some memorable experiences with them too. But this one specifically, I was thinking in terms of it being like starting over and with a whole set of people who don't know me. It was recommended and I got this and I learned this. It's a stack of different experiences amalgamated into one.
That's awesome. And what I love about that story is I think that it shows that when you focus on like the human aspect and like lifting each other up and working together and the synergy that's built works way better than somebody saying, you have this deadline, you better make this deadline. And put the pressure on them. Right. And I've worked with a lot of people that are like, well, if I just push you harder and make you work, longer hours, you'll get the work done. And it's like, or, again, focusing on the personal side of things, like making them feel welcome, making them feel part of the team, and people then want to actually produce good work, right? So
right. I've worked in retail for 10 years, and what I feel like a lot of folks who works in games, they miss a lot of the service part of things. Like, you don't have to work in food for the service. In terms of, I'd never worked in food, but I worked in different retail stores where that is a service. You do, how may I help you? How can I resolve the solution? What are we working with today, et cetera? What's going on? You understand personality types. And so, yes, there's a personality type that, and you see this in school, mostly like high school, of, I do better under pressure and I get it done. I don't know how those people function, but I know it's not healthy on a bigger level, right? At the core, like at the human core of it. But that's where their mind works. So I think what you're saying is most like, hey, if we actually had this ubiquitous type of, this is art, we don't want to rush you. It shouldn't be rushed. Let your creativity flow. Here's this time we'd like to kind of get done.
Yeah.
And let's make it happen. Unfortunately, what I've learned too in that aspect is that if they have investments or investors and PR teams to kind of get things done, they can't work without a schedule of some sort either. And then also, like, if we don't put something on a milestone or a deadline, I hate saying the word deadline, but I was told that that you should be saying, like, delineating what those terms are. You will get it done eventually, because without that, then you're just working on something forever.
Sure.
So there's a balance, is what I guess my point is.
Yeah. Well, can you talk about what projects you're currently working on right now? Is that something you can say?
Sure. Let me get this list going. It's going to be a list. Be prepared. It's going to be a list.
Or you could just order the magazine. You should have said just order the magazine. And then you could see all the things that I'm working on. Yeah.
No, actually, there's nothing in there, but you can order the magazine.
Yeah. Order the magazine for sure. Yeah.
But that just talks about the favorite digital audio workstation, or what I create music in, and also my process of how I write interactive, dynamic, and adaptive music. So the projects I am working on are, I go this from memory. I finished the soundtrack for Stardanger School for Witches. So I've been sending out sneak listens to those that are interested in hearing it. And that soundtrack will be released this year for sure. It's in early access now. It's a visual novel RPG where you're playing in the sense of, it's taking some inspiration from another magical type of story that's very, very popular. I'm just going to say it's Harry Potter. I'm not ashamed to say that. I didn't get that book. But the score is a folk hybrid. And so if you envisioned witches that are good and fae that are in a magical fantasy land and playing these type of instruments in this world outside, and with some type of other music genre influences amalgamated with, obviously, with fantasy, that's what that score is about. And that's what the game is mostly about: building relationships and becoming good at spells and figuring out the feud that's going on within the world. So that's Stardanger School for Witches. The other game that I'm scoring is a Ground Zero, which is a spinoff to a Ground. And people don't know, the Ground is the game that's very popular still, people related to Terraria and Minecraft, but with a story. And so a Ground Zero is a spinoff, and the Ground was 2D and this is 3D. So now people are saying it's like Minecraft and Factorio, which is cool, I guess, if you like those type of games, survival crafting with the story. And so I was finishing the soundtrack for that, and now I've got to push it out because now I got more tracks to write. That's good.
That's good. Yeah.
So, the game has expanded, and people are really taking a liking to that. So Ground Zero is going to be also still working on that.
Can I ask a quick question about that? Do you? Sorry, I interrupted you, and I'm so sorry. But I put a quick question about it. Did you have to rebuild the palettes then for that? I'm curious about that because of the fact that you had the game before. Did you rebuild the palettes, or did you kind of take songs from the previous one?
Great question. Thank you. Yes to both. I did rebuild it. And I did take songs back from it because it was directed through the references. They referenced me again. So they said it should be this, and this is the style it should be for this specific track, but it should also be related to these tracks that you wrote for this part in the ground. And so I got that started. It was thinking, oh man, well, how do I do that? And then I thought, oh, well, I'll just sample myself.
Interesting.
And I'll just, because I kind of was kind of, what is this word? I was been using this word. I was thinking conditioned. It was from doing the, if you look online as YouTube and there's a round trailer. The first trailer I wrote was the trailer. But when there's another trailer, and I had to remix that trailer music to match a different trailer music. So I've already been conditioned to kind of do this, and I had to just remember, I'm just going to use things from here. And this is a composer technique. Usually I would write it into something another way, but I really just took clips of it and just inserted that, and then just remixed it and put it into a different part, and then did other things. So I'm really just using the composer techniques in a modern form.
That's cool.
And it really saves me because then I don't have to reinvent and rethink the entire palette. But the palette is different because it is a different style, and it doesn't sound as chiptune-ish and that, but there are elements to it. And that's because I want the player to be reminded about where it came from, so they're familiar with themes and sound palettes now too, which is something I don't hear a lot of composers get the opportunity to do unless because there were different SKUs. So PSP wouldn't sound like the PlayStation 3 palette because the limitations that it could be, or a better example would be the Sega Genesis port wouldn't sound like the Super Nintendo port because there are chipset differentiation.
Yeah.
So yes, that's what I did do. And I'm also doing design mechanics with that. I'm very excited for this, if I may share.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well. There's some mechanics in terms of Stardander stuff too that are tied to it. Like the menu screen, it will never sound the same for each player. But in a Ground Zero, yes. So for a Ground Zero, there's a different, obviously it doesn't sound like Stardander, it's different sense and different moods. But there's every level that you're on, whether you're in the beginning level, the music is tied to the items. And I have to probably tell this now because I don't think when people stream it, there's like this DMCA thing going on, and it sucks because again, I put that effort into it, and now they won't play the music. So this is the only way I can share it. So the music is tied to the items. So every time the item changes, I did this talk at GDC I think last year too, it was like tool sets. Every time the item you change the item to do something in the game, the music's going to change seamlessly throughout where you're at. So you're just thinking it's level music, but it's actually interactive level music for you. Not only that, that's only for the first level. When you go to the second level and you encounter the things that are in that level, the music's going to change dynamically. It's no longer tied to the items. It's now tied to whatever you're playing within that level.
Oh my gosh.
So if you interact with something, then that music's going to react to you in terms of whatever you're doing. Then level 3, it's themed about what the level is. And therefore, whatever your goals are within that level, the theme is going to change based off of what you're doing and have an attribution connection to what was also in level 2. So the system is now still connected. And then level 4, it'll do something different. And level 5, I'm figuring that out. And then whatever other things are going to happen, I'll come up with those ideas to be continued when it happens.
Wow. I love that. I got to see a little bit of your process of how you think through like how to build that music. That was fantastic. That's awesome. I love it.
Thank you. Sorry. So continuing on. So Ground Zero, that's in early access now as well. So you can experience some of those type of systems and enjoy. And the purpose of that, I should say also, is that I did it so that you're not bored. You shouldn't ever turn the music off. And so hopefully you're going to be down there building a lot of stuff for a long time. And so I don't want you to be bored. Again, thinking about the player in terms of the extension of those times and hours that you're going to be spending.
Yeah.
So that's a ground zero. Then I'm working on this game called Windrush Tales, and Windrush Tales is based off the movement of Windrush, where people in the Caribbean moved to the UK to rebuild it after World War II. And it's the first historical game of its kind, and I'm very honored to be working with Chella Ramanan and Corey Brotherson and Claire Morwood for Under Threefold Presents to create this type of storytelling that is not been told in games about this movement and the experiences that the Caribbean folks had undergone in the UK. And it's really great. They've been pulling actual real stories from people of the time and integrating them in our own way to kind of share what these are. And so I'm writing the score for that game.
Cool.
And that's been it's odd marketing for that one, but like there's a trailer, but then there's a demo, and I don't know where those things are. But Windrush Tales is the game. So if you're interested, it's in the British Library. So that's a huge thing. Yes,
that's so
it is.
Cool.
It's in the British Library.
Oh my God.
So yeah, if you're in the UK, then you can check that out. And then I'm also scoring the game Sunken Stones, which is my task. He talked about challenges was to not make it sound like Hans Zimmer in D minor and Pirates of the Caribbean, but really make it Pirates of the Caribbean, because the developer is Big Love to Spite Rich. He's a Jamaican developer.
Okay.
And like I said, my heritage is from Barbados. So he said, like, I need it to be like an anime, but we just like bring back what the sound of Caribbean would be for the Pirates of the Air. I'm thinking like, whoa, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I have to now pioneer that. And so I've been writing the score for that. And I hired my mom to sing on that score as well. She's sung on Stardander, but we do a duo. And so that's like the theme of that. And I'll be releasing that soundtrack onto pre-order soon, hopefully by summer, and getting those things together. I'm putting that there. And then also another studio development is Sprite Wrench. Is working on Duppy Detective Tasha. Sunken Stones in, I think, Wishlist, and the Duppy Detective Tasha could do as well. And that's more like a detective game. And like, it seems educational. It looks educational, but it's really well done. The animation is phenomenal. And Glenn is spearheading that as the studio lead. And I'm scoring that as well. And then there's another project I'm actually I'm signing today.
Oh my God.
It's a Protostar, and this is like a Mega Man style like looking game.
Oh, cool.
That you can do and reverse around, and I got some really cool design mechanics for that as well because I'm excited. And so yeah, I'll stop there. There's like 3 others, but they're like in limbo. I'm not really like on them yet. Like one of them I've done, and sort of like but I know I'm working on them. But those are the one, like I'm focusing on the ones that I like, or okay, they are announced. So we got Sunken Stones, Duppy Detective Tasha, A Ground Zero, Stardander, and Windrush Tales.
Wow.
And so yeah, I feel like I'm missing one, but I'm sure I'm good.
You were so busy. Wow. I really appreciate the time that you took out of your schedule to meet with me. I was like, how did you find time to meet with me? That is, wow. I have so many more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. Before we go, how can people find you and follow you on social media? And then also, I know that you have a YouTube channel too. Can you plug that as well?
Yeah, happy to plug it all for you. So you can find me on Twitter X, Chase, Chase, B as in boy, E as in Eric, T as in Tom, H as in Harry, E as in Eric, A as in Apple, Bethea, just like that, Chase Bethea on Twitter X. That's also my YouTube channel, so youtube.com/Chase Bethea. And if you're a game developer, you're liking what you hear in terms of like the mindsets and mechanics and things that I bring to the table, then you can connect me on LinkedIn, and that is the same Chase Bethea there. Also, you can check out my work on Bandcamp. I highly suggest that. It's the best way to support me. It's how I'm able to kind of do more of these things. And it shows the labor of love that you see as, listening to music, video game music of my style, my kind. I'm a very eclectic video game composer, so I don't sound like anyone else. So if you're interested in opening your ears and being optimistic, check out the Bandcamp. But I'm also on all the major streaming platforms that don't pay as much as they should.
Yeah.
So that's why I pushed Bandcamp first. And then, yes, you can that's my gift to you, is to listen to those if you're not paying for those streaming platforms, for free.
Nice. Chase, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. Like, I really enjoyed this conversation, and yeah, I appreciate everything you do. And I knew going into this conversation, I'm going to have somebody that is going to blow me out of the water in regards to like their intelligence and how they think about things. And I'm in awe of everything you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate that. I mean, the words of the support and consideration, it means a lot. It really does. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Listeners, make sure that I'll put the links in. I'll put your Bandcamp link actually in the show notes as well. So that way you can go and support Chase as well and listen to the music and support the games he's working on as well. And again, thank you so much for everything you do, Chase.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon. We'll do a part 2.
Part 2. Yes, exactly.